The waiter's eyes widened as he looked at the receipt in his trembling hands, then at me. Then at my daughter, Law Jessica, who was still pointing toward the exit like I was some unwanted party crasher. "Mom," he said, his voice cutting through the expensive classical music and champagne chatter, "you're the one who paid for all of this." The color drained from Jessica's face so fast I thought she might faint right there on the marble floor of the country club she'd claimed as her own. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs, leading to this moment when my own son's wife would try to humiliate me in front of 50 guests at what I thought was a family celebration. But sometimes when you love someone, you choose to see their potential instead of their patterns. Sometimes you keep giving chances until there are no more chances left to give. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding Jessica means understanding the woman I used to be. 3 years ago, when my son Michael first brought her home to our house in Riverside, California, I was so ready to love her. After his divorce from his first wife, Sarah, Michael had been alone for 2 years, throwing himself into his work as a software engineer and barely calling his old mom, except for the obligatory holidays. Then Jessica walked into our Sunday dinner wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile just a little too bright. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, extending a manicured hand that felt like holding a butterfly, "Michael has told me so much about you. I've been dying to meet the woman who raised such an incredible man." The words were perfect. The tone was perfect. Even the way she complimented my pot roast and asked for the recipe felt perfect. But there was something in her eyes that reminded me of the salespeople at expensive stores who size you up the moment you walk in, calculating whether you're worth their time. Michael was smitten. At 42, my son had found his confidence again, and watching him light up every time Jessica laughed or touched his arm filled my heart with the kind of joy only a mother knows. "She's different, Mom," he told me, as we cleaned dishes that night while Jessica powdered her nose. "She challenges me. She makes me want to be better." I squeezed his shoulder and told him I was happy for him, because I was. Wasn't I? The engagement came 6 months later. Jessica chose a ring that cost more than my car, but Michael was making good money and seemed thrilled to spoil her. The wedding followed 8 months after that, a lavish affair at the Ritz-Carlton that left my head spinning, and my savings account significantly lighter after I insisted on contributing to help the young couple start their life together. Jessica had specific ideas about everything, from the flowers to the place cards, and somehow those ideas always came with premium price tags. "I just want everything to be perfect," she'd say whenever I gently suggested a less expensive alternative. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Mom Pat." She'd started calling me Mom Pat right after the engagement, and I'd convinced myself it was endearing rather than presumptuous. "Michael deserves the best, don't you think?" What could I say to that? Of course my son deserved the best. Of course I wanted their special day to be everything they dreamed of. So I wrote another check, and then another, watching my retirement fund shrink like ice cream on hot pavement, while Jessica's smile grew brighter with each deposit. The first year of their marriage, things seemed smooth enough. Jessica was working as a marketing coordinator for some startup, though she complained constantly about her boss and the workload and how nobody there appreciated her creativity. Michael would come home from his long day's programming and listen to her vent over dinner, nodding sympathetically while she picked at the expensive organic meals she'd ordered from that trendy delivery service. I'd invite them over for Sunday dinners, the way families do, but Jessica always had a reason why they couldn't make it. "We're so swamped with setting up the house," or "Jessica's been working late on a big campaign," or "we already made plans to try that new restaurant in downtown LA. Young married couples needed their space, their time, to build their own traditions. But slowly, Michael started calling less. When I'd phone him at work, he'd sound distracted, hurried. "Can I call you back later, Mom? Jessica and I are supposed to look at new cars tonight, or couches, or vacation destinations." Always something that required his immediate attention and came with a price tag that made my head spin. The real shift happened about 18 months into their marriage. Jessica quit her job to focus on building her personal brand and explore her entrepreneurial side. Michael explained this to me over coffee at a Starbucks near his office, one of the few times I could catch him without Jessica attached to his hip, like an expensive accessory. "She's got some really innovative ideas, Mom," he said, stirring sugar into his latte with more focus than the task required. "She wants to start a lifestyle blog, maybe get into influencer marketing. It takes time to build that kind of thing. That sounds wonderful, honey, I said, though something in my chest felt tight. Will she be looking for other work in the meantime? You know, to help with expenses. Michael's jaw twitched, just barely, but I caught it. We're fine, financially, Mom. I'm doing well at work, and Jessica's got some family money to fall back on. This was news to me, but I nodded and changed the subject to his health and whether he was getting enough sleep. Over the following months, I noticed Michael looking more tired every time I saw him. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. And he'd developed a habit of checking his phone constantly, as if expecting bad news. When I asked about it, he'd wave me off. Just work stuff, Mom. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. I'd raised Michael as a single mother. After his father died in a construction accident when Michael was 12, I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, driving school bus in the mornings and cleaning offices at night. And somehow we'd always made it work without Michael looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now my successful, well-paid son looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. The invitations to family gatherings became even rarer. Christmas, Jessica announced they'd be spending with her family in Connecticut. Easter, they were taking a couple's retreat to Napa Valley. We need to invest in our relationship, Jessica explained when I called to ask about our traditional Easter brunch. Couples who vacation together stay together, right, Mom Pat, by their 2nd anniversary. I realized I'd been relegated to birthday cards and the occasional lunch with Michael when Jessica was busy with her brand development meetings. I told myself this was normal. Young couples needed space. I was probably being too clingy, too much like those mothers-in-law you see in movies who can't let go of their sons. But the real wake-up call came last spring. About 6 months ago now. Michael called me on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my tomatoes in the backyard. His voice sounded strange, strained. Mom, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. My heart started pounding, the way it does when you know bad news is coming. What is it, sweetheart? Did you ever give Jessica money, like, directly to her? Not for wedding expenses or anything we talked about. I set down my watering can and sank into my patio chair. No, honey. Why would you ask that? There was a long pause. Too long. She said you offered to help with some of her business startup costs. Said you wanted to invest in her blog platform or something. The words hit me like a slap. Michael, I never said anything like that. I haven't even talked to Jessica in over a month. Another pause, then a sound I hadn't heard from my son since he was a teenager dealing with his father's death, a shaky intake of breath that meant he was trying not to cry. Mom, he said finally, I think I'm in trouble. That conversation lasted 2 hours. Michael told me about credit cards I didn't know existed, about Jessica's shopping habits that had somehow escalated from occasional splurges to daily purchases, about the second mortgage they'd taken on their house to fund what Jessica called investments in our future. He told me about the blog that never launched, the online store that never opened, the photography equipment and professional lighting and designer clothes that were all necessary for building her brand. I love her, Mom, he said at the end, and his voice sounded so young, so lost. But I don't know how to fix this without hurting her. She says I don't believe in her dreams. She says I'm holding her back. I wanted to drive over there immediately and shake some sense into both of them, but I also knew that wasn't going to help. Michael was a grown man who needed to find his own way through this mess. All I could do was listen and be there when he needed me. Have you considered counseling? I asked. I brought it up once. Jessica said therapists are just people who couldn't fix their own problems, so why would we pay them to fix ours? Red flags were waving so hard in my mind they could have powered a windmill. But I kept my voice calm. What do you think you want to do? I don't know, he said. I really don't know. I don't know, he said. I really don't know. We started having those coffee dates more regularly after that conversation. Michael would meet me at different places around town, always somewhere Jessica wouldn't think to look for him. He'd update me on their financial situation, which seemed to get more complicated every week. Jessica had convinced him they needed a financial advisor, then convinced him they needed a different financial advisor when the first one suggested they cut back on discretionary spending. She says we have to spend money to make money, Michael told me over lunch at a diner in Riverside. She's got all these plans, Mom. She shows me spreadsheets and projections about how her business is going to take off. It all looks so official. I wanted to ask if he'd seen any actual income from any of these ventures, but I bit my tongue. Michael wasn't stupid. He was just in love with someone who was very good at making her problems sound like opportunities. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Michael called me on a Friday evening, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. "Mom, I can't talk long," he said, "but I wanted to let you know we're having a party next weekend. Jessica's idea. She wants to celebrate some business milestone or something." "That sounds nice," I said, though Jessica's voice was getting louder in the background. Something about caterers and decorations and how everything needed to be absolutely perfect. "It's going to be at the Riverside Country Club," Michael continued, and I could hear him covering the phone to muffle Jessica's continued instructions. "Saturday afternoon, around 2. Jessica said she'd call you with the details, but Jessica never called. I waited 3 days, then called Michael's number and got voicemail. I tried again the next day and the day after that. Finally, I called Jessica directly. "Oh, Mom, Pat," she said, her voice bright as artificial sunshine. "I'm so sorry. Things have been absolutely crazy with party planning. Listen, about Saturday, I think we're going to keep it pretty small this time. Just Michael's work, friends, and some of my business contacts. Nothing personal, you understand. It's really more of a networking thing." My chest felt tight. "I see. Well, what kind of milestone are you celebrating? Maybe I could at least send a card or some flowers." "Oh, you're so sweet," Jessica said, though her tone suggested I was anything but. "It's actually kind of complicated business stuff. Honestly, it would probably bore you, but I'll make sure Michael tells you all about it afterward, okay?" I hung up, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My own son's celebration, and I wasn't invited. I tried calling Michael again, but his voicemail box was full. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the checks I'd written, all the family gatherings I'd been gradually excluded from. I thought about my late husband Robert and what he would have said about this situation. Robert had always been direct, sometimes brutally so. "Ellen," he would have told me, "stop making excuses for people who don't respect you." Friday morning, I made a decision. I was going to that party. I didn't have an invitation, but I knew where the Riverside Country Club was, and I knew what time the party started. I spent Saturday morning getting ready with more care than I'd taken in months. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one with the small roses that Robert had always said brought out my eyes. I did my hair and put on lipstick and told myself I was going to show up with dignity and grace, the way a mother should. The country club parking lot was full of expensive cars when I arrived at 2. BMWs and Mercedes and Audis, gleaming in the California sunshine like jewelry. I found a spot near the back and sat in my 12-year-old Honda Civic for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main dining room, I could see the party in full swing. There were flower arrangements taller than I was, servers in black and white uniforms carrying trays of what looked like champagne and fancy appetizers, and guests who seemed to have stepped out of a country club catalog. And there, in the center of it all, was Jessica, in an emerald green cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I walked through the front doors with my head held high. The hostess at the reception desk looked at me questioningly, but I smiled and said, "I'm here for the Patterson party," and she waved me through. The main dining room was even more impressive up close. Crystal chandeliers, pristine white tablecloths, silver serving pieces that reflected the light like mirrors. Jessica had outdone herself. This wasn't a small networking event. This was a full-scale celebration that probably cost more than some people's weddings. I spotted Michael near the bar, talking to a group of men in expensive suits. He looked handsome in his charcoal gray jacket, but tired. Even from across the room, I could see those stress lines around his eyes. Our eyes met for just a moment, and his face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. Surprise, then something that might have been relief, then something that looked almost like panic. Before I could make my way over to him, Jessica materialized beside me like a perfectly groomed storm cloud. "Mom, Pat," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes sharp as broken glass. "What a surprise. I thought I mentioned this was a business event." "You did," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but I thought I'd stop by anyway to congratulate you on your milestone. What exactly are we celebrating?" Jessica's smile never wavered, but something flashed behind her eyes. "Oh, just some boring business stuff. Nothing that would interest you. But since you're here, why don't you grab a drink and mingle for a few minutes? Then maybe ... double quotes. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Show up, show face, then leave. I was being managed. "Actually," I said, "I'd love to hear about this business milestone. I know how hard you've been working on building your brand." Jessica's laugh sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Really? It's so technical. But look, There's Michael. I'm sure he'd love to say hello. She started to steer me toward the bar, her manicured fingers gripping my elbow just a little too tightly. But before we could take more than a few steps, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive handbag appeared beside us. "Jessica, darling," the woman said, air kissing both of Jessica's cheeks. "This party is absolutely divine. You must give me the name of your event planner." "Oh, thank you, Margaret," Jessica gushed. "Actually, I planned everything myself. It's all part of building my event coordination business. I'm branching out from lifestyle blogging into luxury event planning." My eyebrows shot up. Event coordination, business. This was the first I'd heard of that particular venture. Margaret clasped her hands together like Jessica had just announced she'd discovered the cure for aging. "How exciting, and what a perfect way to showcase your talents. This whole thing must have cost a fortune, but I'm sure it'll pay for itself in new clients." Jessica's grip on my elbow tightened. "Well, you know what they say about investing in your future. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money." "Absolutely," Margaret agreed. "And Michael must be so supportive of your entrepreneurial spirit. It's not every husband who would underwrite something like this." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Underwrite as in, Michael had paid for all of this elaborate showcase of Jessica's latest business pivot. "Oh, Michael's been incredible," Jessica said, her voice getting higher and brighter. "So supportive of all my dreams. He really believes in investing in our future together." Margaret smiled and moved on to air-kiss someone else, leaving Jessica and me standing near a table laden with what looked like a sushi station that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. "Jessica," I said quietly, "exactly how much did this party cost?" Her perfect smile flickered. "I don't think that's really any of your concern, Mom, Pat. It is if my son is paying for it. Michael and I are married," she said, her voice taking on an edge that cut through the classical music and polite conversation. "Our finances are our business." I looked around the room again, taking in the obvious expense of everything from the imported flowers to the uniformed servers to the premium bar setup. "This must have cost thousands of dollars." "It's an investment," Jessica said, the words coming out clipped and rehearsed. "In my business, in our future. Some people understand that, and some people don't." The implication was clear. I was one of the people who didn't understand. I was the small-minded mother-in-law who couldn't appreciate Jessica's big dreams and expensive tastes. "Where did the money come from?" I asked. Jessica's face changed then. The perfect hostess mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something underneath that made my chest tighten. Anger, real anger, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "I think," she said, her voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear, "that you should probably leave." The words hit me like a slap. Here, in front of 50 strangers, at a party paid for with my son's money, my daughter-in-law was asking me to leave. "Excuse me?" I said. "This is a business event," Jessica continued, her smile snapping back into place like a rubber band. "I really think it would be better if you went home. I'm sure you understand. It would be better if you went home. I'm sure you understand." I looked across the room and saw Michael deep in conversation with those same suited men, completely unaware of what was happening. Part of me wanted to march over there and tell him exactly what his wife had just said to me. Part of me wanted to grab one of those crystal champagne glasses and see how it sounded when it shattered against the marble floor. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'll stay for a few more minutes. Thank you." Jessica's eyes flashed. "Mom, Pat, I really think Jessica." "Honey," I interrupted, my voice just as sweet as hers. "I raised that boy over there for 30 years. I think I can handle a few minutes at a party." For a moment, we stared at each other like two cats sizing up a fight. Then Jessica's smile stretched even wider, and she said, "Of course, enjoy yourself. I need to check on the catering." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing alone next to the sushi station, my face burning with humiliation and my heart pounding with rage. I should have left then. Any reasonable person would have left then. But reasonable had gotten me excluded from family gatherings and dismissed from conversations and treated like an inconvenience in my own son's life. Reasonable had gotten me a daughter-in-law who thought she could order me around like hired help. So instead of leaving, I walked over to the bar and ordered a glass of white wine. The bartender was a young man with kind eyes and the sort of practiced friendliness that comes from years of dealing with wealthy people's parties. "Beautiful event," I said as he handed me the wine. "It really is," he agreed. "The lady who planned it has excellent taste. Everything's top shelf. I'm sure it cost a fortune." He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in slightly. "Between you and me, This is probably a $15,000 party, maybe more. The flowers alone cost more than most people spend on a wedding. $15,000? I nearly choked on my wine. Michael's mortgage payment was probably less than that. I spent the next 20 minutes wandering around the party, listening to conversations and watching Jessica work the room like a professional politician. She introduced herself to everyone as Jessica Patterson, event coordination specialist, and handed out business cards from a silver case that matched her jewelry. She talked about her luxury event planning, services, and her exclusive client base and her upcoming expansion into destination weddings. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin of Michael's financial future. I was standing near the window, watching Jessica pose for pictures with some of her new business contacts, when Michael finally made his way over to me. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded strained. "I didn't know you were coming." Jessica didn't mention she'd invited me. His face told me everything I needed to know. She said she thought about it but decided to keep the guest list small. "It doesn't look very small to me." Michael glanced around the room, taking in the crowd of well-dressed strangers. "No," he said slowly, "it doesn't." We stood there for a moment, both of us watching his wife charm her way through a room full of people who might or might not ever hire her for anything, at a party that was costing him more money than most people saw in months. "Michael," I said carefully, "are you okay?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to climb into my bed after nightmares about his father's accident, lost, scared, trying so hard to be brave. "I don't know, Mom," he said quietly. "I really don't know." Before I could respond, Jessica appeared beside us like she'd been summoned by some invisible signal. "There you are, baby," she said to Michael, slipping her arm through his. "Margaret Westfield wants to talk to you about maybe doing some corporate events for her husband's firm. This could be huge for us." "For us?" Michael asked. Jessica's laugh was bright and brittle. "For my business, obviously. But that benefits both of us, right? When I succeed, we succeed." She tugged on his arm, ready to drag him back into the crowd of potential clients, but Michael didn't move. "Jessica," he said, "exactly how much did this party cost?" Her smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "Michael, honey, we talked about this. It's an investment. You can't build a business without investing in it." "That's not what I asked." The three of us stood there in a triangle of tension while the party continued around us, classical music and laughter and the clink of expensive glassware providing the soundtrack to what felt like the beginning of the end of something. "We can talk about this later," Jessica said, her voice tight. "At home, in private." "I'd like to know too," I said. Jessica's head snapped toward me like a striking snake. "I don't think this is any of your business, Mom Pat." "It is if you're spending my son's money." "Our money," Jessica corrected, her voice getting louder. A few nearby guests glanced our way. "Michael and I are married. What's his is mine, and what's yours is yours, apparently," I said. Michael looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. "Mom, Jessica, please don't." "No," Jessica said, her perfect composure finally cracking. "I'm tired of this. I'm tired of your mother treating me like I'm some kind of gold digger. I'm tired of her questioning every decision we make, every dollar we spend, every plan we have for our future." "I've never said you were a gold digger," I said. "You don't have to say it. It's written all over your face every time you look at me, every time Michael tells you about something new I'm working on, or something I need for my business, or some opportunity that requires an investment." She was getting louder, and more people were starting to notice. Michael looked mortified. "Jessica, please," he said. "People are staring. Let them stare," she said. "I'm done pretending your mother approves of me when she clearly doesn't. I'm done walking on eggshells around someone who thinks I'm not good enough for her precious son." The room had gone quiet around us. 50 people in expensive clothes were witnessing what was quickly becoming a very public family meltdown. "I never said you weren't good enough," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were shaking. "I said I was concerned about how much money you're spending. Money that isn't even yours," Jessica shot back. "Money that my husband earns and that we get to decide how to spend. Money he's going into debt to provide for your business ventures that never seem to make any actual money." Jessica's face went white, then red, then white again. "How dare you? How dare I? What? Point out that in 3 years of marriage, your husband has taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, and mortgaged his house to fund businesses that exist only on paper." "That's not true," Jessica said. but her voice wavered. Isn't it? Show me $1 of income from any of these ventures. Show me one client who's actually paid you for anything other than spending their money on parties like this. Michael stood frozen between us, his face gray. Around us, the party guests watched like we were dinner theater they hadn't paid for. You know what? Jessica said, her voice shaking with rage. I don't have to justify anything to you. This is my party, at my event, with my guests, and I want you to leave, now. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. Your event, I said quietly. Yes, my event. My business launch party. My network. My success. She turned to Michael. Tell her to leave, Michael. Tell your mother that this is our life and our celebration, and she needs to go home. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. Jessica, I can't. You can't. What? Support your wife. Choose your wife over your mother. Stand up for our marriage. The manipulation was so blatant, so calculated, that I felt something snap inside my chest. 3 years of watching this woman drain my son's bank account and his spirit. 3 years of being gradually pushed out of his life. 3 years of biting my tongue and making excuses and trying to be understanding. Fine, I said. I'll leave. But first, I have a question for you, Jessica. She crossed her arms over her expensive dress. What if this is your event, and your business launch, and your success? Then who paid for all of this? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Michael and I know, I interrupted. Not Michael and you. Who specifically wrote the check for this $15,000 party? Whose account did the money come out of? Whose name is on the receipt? Jessica glanced desperately at Michael, but he was staring at the floor like it held the answers to all of life's mysteries. I don't see why that matters, she said finally. It matters because you're standing here telling me to leave your party, claiming ownership of an event that you couldn't afford to pay for yourself. I contributed, she said weakly. How much? Silence. How much, Jessica? More silence. Around us, 50 people held their collective breath. That's when I noticed one of the servers standing nearby with a small leather folder in his hands, the kind restaurants used to present the bill. He was looking between Jessica and me with the expression of someone who'd walked into the middle of a domestic dispute and didn't know whether to stay or flee. Excuse me, I called to him. Are you the manager? He nodded nervously. I called to him. Are you the manager? He nodded nervously. Assistant manager, ma'am. Is there a problem? Could you tell me who paid for this event? I'm trying to settle a family discussion. The young man looked around the room like he was hoping someone else would handle this. But when no one stepped forward, he opened the leather folder. The payment was made with a credit card, he said carefully. The name on the card is Michael Patterson. Jessica's face crumpled like a paper bag. That doesn't mean anything. We're married. It's our card. Actually, the server continued, glancing down at the receipt. There are some notes here from when the booking was made. Let me see, ... He squinted at the paper. Yes, here it is. The person who made the reservation specifically requested that any questions about payment be directed to ... He looked up at me. Are you Ellen Patterson? My heart stopped. Yes, the notes say that Ellen Patterson is the financial guarantor for this event, and that any billing questions should go through her first. The room spun around me like a carnival ride. I'm sorry, what? The server looked as confused as I felt. That's what it says here, ma'am. Ellen Patterson, financial guarantor. There's even a note that you insisted on reviewing all the charges before the final payment was processed. But I started to say, then stopped. A horrible, impossible thought was forming in the back of my mind. Could I see that receipt? I asked. The server hesitated, glancing at Jessica, who looked like she was about to throw up. Please, I said. I'm apparently the financial guarantor. I think I have a right to see what I'm guaranteeing. He handed me the leather folder with the reluctance of someone passing along a lit stick of dynamite. The first thing I saw was the total. $17,847. $17,847 for one afternoon party. The second thing I saw was Michael's name on the credit card slip. The third thing I saw was a handwritten note at the bottom. Per E. Patterson's request. All final approvals must go through her before charging the card. She will confirm payment authorization on day of event. I stared at the note, trying to make sense of what I was reading. I never wrote this, I said. I never spoke to anyone here about being a financial guarantor. The server looked even more uncomfortable. Ma'am, we have a recording of the conversation from when the booking was made. Company policy is to record all event planning calls for quality assurance. The person who called identified herself as Ellen Patterson and specifically requested to be listed as the financial guarantor. When was this call made? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. He flipped through some papers clipped to the receipt. 3 weeks ago. Tuesday afternoon, around 2 p.m. I looked at Jessica, who had gone from pale to green. 3 weeks ago, Tuesday afternoon, the same day Michael had called me about the party. When I could hear Jessica's voice in the background giving instructions about caterers and decorations. Jessica, I said slowly, did you call this country club pretending to be me? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Did you tell them I was paying for this party? Still nothing. Michael's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Jessica, what did you do? She looked at him with tears starting to form in her perfectly made-up eyes. I can explain. Explain what? He said. Explain how you impersonated my mother to guarantee payment for a $17,000 party. Explain how you've been planning to stick her with the bill for your business launch. It's not like that, Jessica said, her voice breaking. I was going to figure it out. I was going to make sure everything worked out. How? Michael demanded. How were you going to make sure my mother didn't get charged $17,000 for a party she didn't even know was happening? Jessica glanced around the room at all the faces staring at her. 50 witnesses to what was turning into the most expensive meltdown in country club history. I thought, she said in a voice so small it was barely audible. I thought if the party was successful, if I got enough clients, I could pay it back before anyone noticed. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning system and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. You thought, Michael said, his voice deadly quiet, that you could commit fraud against my mother and pay it back before anyone noticed. It's not fraud, Jessica said desperately. We're family. You were going to what? I interrupted. Steal $17,000 from me and hope I wouldn't notice. I wasn't stealing, she said, tears streaming down her face now, ruining her perfect makeup. I was borrowing. I was going to pay you back. With what money? Michael asked. You don't have any income. You don't have any client. You don't have any business except spending money we don't have on schemes that never work. Jessica looked around the room again, at all the people who had come to celebrate her success, and I realized that some part of her had actually believed her own fantasy. She had actually thought this party would launch some kind of real business, that these strangers would become clients, that $17,000 would somehow magically transform into a profitable enterprise. I was trying to build something, she whispered. I was trying to make something of myself. By committing identity theft against my mother. Michael's voice was getting louder. By forging financial agreements. By lying to everyone, including me. I never lied to you, Jessica said. You never told me you'd made my mother financially responsible for this party. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. You're damn right I wouldn't understand, Michael said, because it's insane. It's illegal. He stopped, running his hands through his hair, looking around the room at the expensive flowers and the uniformed servers, and the 50 guests who were getting quite a show for their free champagne and appetizers. How much of this have you done? He asked quietly. What do you mean? How many other times have you used my mother's name to guarantee payments? How many other bills are going to show up that she's supposedly responsible for? Jessica's silence was answer enough. Michael turned to me, and the look on his face broke my heart. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I swear I had no idea. I know, sweetheart, I said. We need to call the police, he said. This is fraud. Identity theft. She's committed actual crimes. No, Jessica said, grabbing his arm. Please, Michael, no, I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I'll get a job. I'll pay everything back. How? He asked. How are you going to pay back $17,000 plus whatever other bills you've racked up in my mother's name? How are you going to pay back 3 years of credit card debt and loans and mortgages? How are you going to fix any of this? She didn't have an answer. How could she? The math was impossible. Even if she got a job tomorrow, even if she worked full-time at decent wages, it would take years to pay back the debt she'd accumulated in pursuit of businesses that existed only in her imagination. I looked around the room at the faces staring at us. Some looked shocked, some looked disgusted, some looked like they were watching a reality TV show and couldn't decide whether to change the channel or grab more popcorn. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, I apologize for the disturbance. It appears there's been some confusion about this event. If anyone needs to leave, I certainly understand. A few people started moving toward the exits, murmuring among themselves, but most stayed, apparently fascinated by the train wreck unfolding in front of the champagne fountain. The assistant manager approached us again, still clutching his leather folder. "Ma'am," he said to me, "about the payment, double quotes, I'll take care of it," I said, pulling out my purse. "No," Michael said. "Mom, you shouldn't have to. It's already done," I said. "The agreement is in my name. I'm responsible." I handed the server my own credit card, the one attached to my savings account, the account where I kept the money I'd planned to use for home repairs and maybe a small vacation someday. $17,000 would pretty much wipe it out, but what choice did I have? The alternative was legal action against Jessica for fraud, which would probably end with Michael having to choose between his wife and his mother, and I couldn't do that to him. "Mom," Michael said as I signed the receipt, "I'll pay you back. Every penny, I swear. We'll figure it out," I said. Jessica stood there crying, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks, her emerald green dress suddenly looking garish instead of elegant. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "What did you mean to happen?" I asked. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing her lipstick. "I just wanted to be successful. I wanted to prove that I could build something, create something. I wanted people to respect me. By lying and stealing, I was going to pay it back," she said again, like repeating it would make it true. "When how? You've been married to my son for 3 years. And in all that time, you've never earned a single dollar from any of your business ventures. What made you think this would be different?" She didn't have an answer because there was no good answer. The truth was that Jessica had been living in a fantasy for so long that she'd started to believe her own stories about future success and inevitable profit. Michael stood beside me, looking older than his 42 years. "We need to go home," he said to Jessica. "We need to figure out how to fix this mess." Jessica nodded. Still crying, she looked around the room one more time at her failed party, her ruined business launch, her collapsed dreams. Then she walked toward the exit with her shoulders slumped and her perfect posture finally broken. Michael lingered beside me for a moment. "Mom, I don't know how to make this right. One step at a time," I said. "That's how we've always handled things. One step at a time." He hugged me then, a real hug. The kind he used to give me when he was young and scared and needed his mother to tell him everything would be okay. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." After they left, I stayed for a few more minutes to handle the final details with the country club staff. The assistant manager was apologetic and professional, assuring me that they would make a note in their system about Jessica's impersonation and that it wouldn't happen again. Most of the guests had dispersed by then, probably heading to their cars to call friends and family about the drama they'd witnessed. I didn't blame them. If I'd been in their shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. Walking to my car in the late afternoon sun, I felt strangely calm. $17,000 was a lot of money, more than I'd ever spent on anything except my house and my car. It would mean no home repairs this year, no vacation, no cushion for unexpected expenses, but it also meant I'd finally seen Jessica's true colors, and more importantly, so had Michael. The drive home gave me time to think about what came next. Michael would probably want to work out some kind of payment plan, though realistically it would take him years to pay me back while also dealing with all the other debt Jessica had accumulated. Jessica would probably cry and promise to change and swear she'd learned her lesson, at least until the next business opportunity caught her eye. But I had a feeling this was the beginning of the end of their marriage. You can forgive a lot of things in a relationship, but deliberate deception about money, especially when it involves your family, is usually a deal breaker. And Michael had looked at Jessica in that country club like he was seeing a stranger. That evening, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you some things." For the next hour, he told me about bills I didn't know existed, about credit cards in his name that he'd never applied for, about loans Jessica had taken out using their joint assets as collateral. He told me about business licenses for companies that never opened, about domain names for websites that were never built, about expensive equipment for services she never provided. "She's been living in a fantasy," he said. "For 3 years, she's been spending money we don't have on businesses that don't exist, convinced that success was just around the corner." "What are you going to do?" I asked, I don't know yet, but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep watching her destroy our financial future while pretending it's all an investment in our dreams. The conversation was painful, but necessary. Michael needed to say these things out loud to someone who loved him enough to listen without judgment. And I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening, so I could help him figure out how to move forward. Over the following weeks, the true extent of Jessica's financial manipulation became clear. She had used Michael's name and credit to fund not just parties and equipment, but also a lifestyle that was completely unsustainable. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury spa treatments, all justified as networking expenses or business necessities. Michael started seeing a financial counselor to figure out how to handle the debt. He also started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional impact of discovering that his wife had been systematically deceiving him for years. Jessica, for her part, seemed genuinely shocked that her actions had consequences. She kept insisting that she'd been trying to build something meaningful, that she'd never intended to hurt anyone, that if people would just give her business ideas more time, everything would work out. But intention doesn't erase impact. Good intentions don't pay bills or restore trust or undo the damage caused by years of financial irresponsibility masked as entrepreneurial ambition. The divorce proceedings started 2 months after the party. Michael filed for separation first, then full divorce when it became clear that Jessica wasn't willing or able to take responsibility for the financial chaos she'd created. The process was complicated by the amount of joint debt and the question of how much Jessica had hidden from Michael. There were business credit cards he'd never seen, loans he'd never signed for, agreements made in his name without his knowledge. Untangling it all required lawyers and accountants and more money that none of us really had. Through it all, Michael and I grew closer than we'd been in years. Without Jessica's constant management of his time and attention, we started having regular Sunday dinners again. He'd come over after church, and we'd cook together and talk about everything except the divorce and the debt and the mess his life had become. "I should have listened to you," he said one afternoon while we were making his father's famous chili recipe. "You were in love," I said. "Love makes us see what we want to see instead of what's really there. But you saw it. You saw what she was doing. I saw that she was expensive and demanding. I didn't see the fraud. I didn't see how deep the deception went." He stirred the chili thoughtfully. "Do you think she ever loved me? Or was I just a convenient source of funding for her fantasies?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because I wasn't sure I knew the answer. Had Jessica loved Michael, or had she loved the lifestyle he could provide? Had she seen him as a partner, or as a means to an end? "I think," I said carefully, "that she loved the idea of the life you could give her. Whether that's the same as loving you is something only she can answer." The divorce was finalized 8 months after the country club party. Michael kept the house but had to take on most of the debt. Jessica got her freedom and a small settlement that was mostly eaten up by legal fees. She moved back to Connecticut to live with her family while she figured out her next chapter. Michael and I never got any of the money back. $17,000 for that one party, plus countless other amounts for business ventures that never materialized, equipment that was never used, and dreams that existed only on paper. But in some ways, it was the best money I ever spent, because it bought me the truth. It bought me my son back. It bought me the end of watching someone I loved being systematically drained and deceived by someone who was supposed to love him in return. Today, Michael is doing better. He's still paying off debt, but he's got a plan and a timeline. And most importantly, he's got clarity about what happened and why. He started dating again, slowly and carefully. And when he introduces me to someone new, I can see that he's learned to trust his instincts instead of his hopes. Jessica, last I heard, is working as a sales associate at an expensive boutique in Hartford and posting on social media about her new chapter in retail fashion. Consulting. Some people never learn. Some people always believe that success is just one more scheme away. But Michael learned. He learned that love without honesty is just expensive loneliness. He learned that dreams without realistic plans are just fantasies. Most importantly, he learned that the people who truly love you don't try to exclude your family from your life, or manipulate your finances, or make you choose between your relationships and their ambitions. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most expensive lessons are also the most valuable ones. I learned that setting boundaries isn't the same as being I learned that asking hard questions isn't the same as being negative. And I learned that sometimes When someone tries to kick you out of the party, the best response isn't to leave quietly. Sometimes the best response is to stay long enough to find out who really paid for everything. So let me ask you something, because I'm curious about your perspective on all this. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Would you have left quietly when Jessica asked you to? Would you have confronted the situation sooner? Would you have refused to pay the $17,000 and let the legal consequences fall where they may? I think about these questions sometimes, especially when I hear stories from other parents who are watching their adult children make questionable choices in love and money. It's such a delicate balance, isn't it? Supporting your children while also protecting yourself, loving someone enough to let them make their own mistakes, while also loving them enough to speak up when those mistakes threaten to destroy them. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to manipulate you financially? How did you handle it? What advice would you give to other parents dealing with difficult in-laws or children who are being taken advantage of? And if this story reminded you of someone in your life who might be going through something similar, share it with them. Sometimes we need to hear other people's stories to recognize our own patterns and find the courage to make necessary changes. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and the complicated ways we learn to love and protect each other. I'm always grateful to hear from you, no matter where in the world you're listening from. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive choices, even when that someone is family, especially when that someone is family.